It'll be numbers that nobody can even imagine. We're going to get the drug prices down, not 30 or 40%, which would be great, not 50 or 60. No, we're going to get them down 1,000%, 600%, 500%, 1,500%. Numbers that are not even thought to be achievable because I've used a certain talent that I have.
I will get drug prices down 1,000%. I'm personally not a math guy, right? But I'm under the impression you can't reduce anything beyond 100%, or maybe you'll just now go to the pharmacy to pick up your prescription and get a wad of cash. We will now get paid to do drugs. That is the horror of socialism. Anyways, that was your daily moment of zen before we get into the horrors. Hello and welcome to State of Play on MintPress News. Today, we will be discussing the new Israeli propaganda being used to justify the mass starvation of Gaza, i.e., they're now blaming the UN, Gaza Health Foundation goons. We're going to talk about them too. You know, the American mercenaries guarding the aid distribution sites, which are actually a bullet and grenade distribution site. And talking with the perfect guest for this episode, Murad Awawdeh, a strategist, organizer, and advocacy expert currently serving as the president and CEO of the New York Immigration Coalition, to talk about ICE raids, because it's almost like all of this stuff is connected. So stay tuned for that after this plug. MintPress News is a small independent newsroom with no corporate sponsors, demonetized on most of all platforms ever since, Google Owl targeted MintPress News for reporting during the Iraq War. So yeah, we're on Patreon. If you're picking up what we're putting down, $5-10 a month goes a long way to keep this show going. And also the other great reporting done by everyone else that's part of the team. And if you're getting nickeled and dimed in late stage capitalism, you don't have to do it. Just like, share, subscribe, get your other people to subscribe. We're really close to 100,000 viewers on YouTube. So, yeah, if you could help us out with that, we appreciate it. We're just glad you're here. All right. So, one societal item that I wanted to discuss while everyone's still filtering in was last night's South Park episode, because that show is a massive cultural engine and it's back. And what happened was not insignificant in the U.S. political landscape. And so basically what happened was South Park mocks Paramount settlement with Trump after creators sign a $1.5 billion deal. And the season premiere of the profane animated series, Jesus Christ urges South Park's townspeople to settle a legal dispute with Trump, or else they'll, quote, end up like Stephen Colbert, who was recently let go from Paramount, apparently over criticisms of Trump. But no, I think the Colbert Report late night talk shows are just not lucrative anymore. Trump may have had something to do with it, but who still watches late night talk shows? I mean, there's so many. There's Jimmy Kimmel, there's Stephen Colbert, there's Seth Meyers, there's, who's that other guy who used to be on SNL? Okay, well, there's a ton, right? Even Jon Stewart now only does one show a week. So anyways, Stephen Colbert was let go, and the media conglomerate Paramount announced Wednesday afternoon that the creators of South Park had agreed to produce 50 new episodes for the next 5 years in a deal reportedly valued at $1.5 billion. 10 hours later, South Park creators Matt Stone and Trey Parker excoriated Paramount for conceding to Trump and aggressively skewered Donald Trump in the premiere episode of the Comedy Central show's 27th season. I'm going to play a clip from it. Paramount is under intense scrutiny for appearing to kowtow to the Trump administration ahead of a proposed blockbuster merger. Stone and Parker were clearly riffing on their corporate parents' eventful summer. So, in case you guys weren't following this story, on July 2nd, Paramount agreed to pay $16 million to settle a lawsuit from Trump, who alleged that CBS's 60 Minutes, who they own, had deceptively edited an interview with former Vice President Harris. CBS denied the claim, but they still settled for $16 million. Stone and Parker, of course, depict Trump as a petulant child in this episode that aired last night, recycling the animation style they used for Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein in the 1999 film South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut. Anyways, they also make profane references to the president's anatomy. So yeah, Servant of the Mount closes with an apparently AI-generated video, and this is what's going around, of Trump wandering in a desert and removing his clothes. Paramount spokesperson have not responded to a request for comment on the episode, and Trump has also not said anything.
Who walked through the desert for you? Who survived the wilderness and gave the ultimate sacrifice? When things heat up, who will deliver us from temptation? Donald J. Trump. No matter how hot it gets, he's not afraid to fight for America. With conviction, discipline, and trust in God, he's survived the desert.
Okay, we got to stop it. We got to stop it right there. But anyways, that was just what was going on. Now, that's a developing story. Just because South Park's such a big show. And of course, you know, they MAGA World responded the way we thought they would. They're like, you know, this goes beyond free speech. This is hate speech. This is an inciting violence. And yeah, that's all I'm going to say about this. Moving on. That was an important news item from my perspective, because this is going to get more and more depressing as this episode goes on. But I did want to touch on something happening right now in South Asia. On the border war kicking off between Cambodia and Thailand. Hopefully it de-escalates, because Cambodia will get the worst of it. Thailand has an aircraft strength of someone's texting me. Has an aircraft strength of 493 aircraft, around 90 fighters and fighter bombers, and Cambodia has 25 aircraft with no offensive capabilities, really. With no hope of air superiority, they're going to get hammered, but the Chinese government has direct influence on both governments, so hopefully they're going to step in and try and de-escalate. Why is this happening? Oh boy. Well, in short, border disputes existent from French colonial occupation and rule. I lived in South Asia for a time. I'll do a segment next week if it escalates over the weekend. But like most things, we can trace its history back to colonialism. Now let's get into the main stuff. All right. Okay. Oh, whoops. I forgot to pull something up. Uh-oh, my bad, guys. We're just going to have to sit here and, you know, drop a comment. I'm not sure we're going to have a live Q&A today because I have an interview. We have an interview, but we're just going to try and make it all work. All right. Found it. Sorry. It's the end of the week. I'm taking tomorrow off, so I'm just not on business today. Okay. Here we go. This is the main thing I want to talk about in terms of foreign affairs. The blockade of Gaza is getting worse and worse and worse. I'm just going to quote some of this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation Intercept article. Basically, they're boasting their entire engagement there as a success. What we're doing has actually been unbelievably effective, said the chair of the Israel-backed U.S. aid group. So basically, on the same day, Gaza health officials reported that at least 20 Palestinians died of malnutrition in the Strip's hospitals over the past 2 days. It's actually been more of that. We think it's up to 90 now. An American official in charge of delivering food amid Israel's restriction of aid declared his program a success. We're going to talk about who he is, Johnny Moore. But yeah, from his perspective, it is a success because look who he was talking to. Quote, "We've been filling a massive gap in a way that's direct to the people, that prioritizes the security of the situation in this very complex environment," unquote, Johnny Moore said, the chair of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, on Tuesday during an event hosted by American Jewish Congress and joined by the World Zionist Organization. Continuing, "And despite what you may read in the press and the criticism that you hear from the United Nations and other institutions, that what we're doing has actually been unbelievably effective. As Palestinians continue to starve to death, of course, in Gaza, Moore, an evangelical minister and former religious advisor to the Trump administration," he was one of the guys who was like putting on all the prayer meetings in the White House, has spent the past several weeks defending his organization's works. He's appeared on mainstream TVs. He's been on pro-Israel podcasts. Don't even get me started on Netanyahu's Nelk Boys interview. He and his foundation have messaged in lockstep with the Israeli government. You know, it's a firm out of Delaware, right? But it has strong ties to Zionist organizations. Yeah. And basically they continue to control the aid. And this is kind of important because this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is not there to do anything humanitarian. I myself talked to 2 Marines who, when I was in DC, applied for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation as a defense contractor job. And they, even though they were infantrymen, they had combat experience, they were denied. They said they didn't have enough and that they were primarily looking for special operations guys. As a former special operations guy, I don't know how to run checkpoints. We didn't run checkpoints. I don't know how to distribute aid logistically. It's not our skill set. It's literally the worst like job description you can have in the military, special operations background for humanitarian operations. It's absolutely insane. So what exactly are we doing? Well, a Gaza whistleblower, or sorry, a GHF whistleblower spoke to Channel 12 in Israel 2 days ago. And I think most of the interview has been scrubbed. I can't find it on Instagram, can't find it on YouTube, can't find it on the internet. But I think the New Arab still had a short up on YouTube from it.
I was standing next to these 2 women, and this contractor throws this stun grenade, and it lands in between me and them. This thing hit her, and she just drops, just lifeless, collapsed to the ground.
Former guard has come forward with explosive testimony. Speaking to Israel's Channel 12, he described extreme and unjustified violence at U.S. and Israeli-backed aid sites.
As the Palestinians were finishing getting the aid that was on the site, the UG Solutions personnel began shooting in their direction, shooting at them, shooting at their feet, shooting into the berms to get them to leave.
Aid groups say the entire model is militarized. Meanwhile, an Israeli government spokesperson in a speech denied the global outcry against Israel's actions in Gaza and blamed Hamas for the famine.
There is no famine caused by Israel. There is, however, a man-made shortage engineered by Hamas. The suffering exists because Hamas has made it so.
Okay, I mean, that's been the age-old messaging, but I woke up this morning and they sent out the Zionist bat signal to all the genocidal propagandists on X, and this is what we're pivoting to. Stand by. Again, I don't know why I hadn't had this pulled up. Just, I'm sorry. It's the end of the week, and everyone's exhausted, and this news cycle is insane, so we're all just trying to do the best. So who's like the worst? Who's one of the worst propagandists? Well, let's do it. Let's pull it up. Where's X? This is X. All right. So Aviva Komplas. There we go. New release. Is Stand Up Nation. She's coming out with a new book. Is Israeli Resilience in the Wake of Disaster. Co-founder of Boundless, former head of speech writing at the Israeli mission to the UN. From Toronto and Jerusalem, New York City, and Boston. Okay. She posts so much, so I'm going to have to scroll down through this. Oh, here we go. All right. Endless trucks of food are sitting inside Gaza, but the UN won't distribute them. The GHF updates, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which we were just talking about, the murderous idiots, have offered to securely deliver all this food to Palestinians, but the UN refuses. Maybe they missed the good old days when Hamas skimmed the aid, sold it for profit, and used the cash to fund their terror army. And of course, she always gets ratioed in the comments. God, stop. Yeah. How many UN aid workers have they murdered? Yeah, the same GHS whose former security guard exposed them for pepper spraying starving civilians, throwing stun grenades at women, firing live rounds at aid drops. Yeah, it's just what they're just now pivoting to mass starvation and blaming the UN on it because international institutions no longer mean anything and we don't listen to them anymore. And what we have to understand is we're about to talk about the politics of displacement here in like the next 5 minutes and why there's some challenges around ethnically cleansing the Gazans, moving them to different countries. We've talked about this many times. We're just going to put it into more of like a theoretical framework, but the bottom line is there's nowhere for them to go. So they just have to keep playing this out and playing this out and playing this out. And hopefully one day there'll be no one left in Gaza. And that's why they're doing these propaganda shifts back, forth. So we're going to talk about displacement today. We're having displacement via ICE operations in Palestine. So the U.S. is actively engaged in two primary zones of displacement. Again, Palestine, and with regards to illegal immigrants and now nationalized citizens here in America. All right. But what are the politics of displacement? And I just want to first say that this is the same issue, Palestine, ICE, because it's the same system. We're done mobilizing against issues. We're now organizing against systems. So it's just functioning in different ways. And it's something we've talked about before, but haven't really defined it. And that is the politics of displacement. And the politics of displacement encompass the ways political forces, institutions, and ideologies shape the movement and resettlement of populations. It examines how displacement is not just a consequence of conflict or natural disaster, but also a deliberate tool used for political and strategic purposes. This includes the displacement of specific groups to gain territory, create homogenous zones, or consolidate political power. Consolidating political power is what we're seeing in America. Gaining territory is what we're seeing in Palestine. It is strategically driven by political actors seeking to achieve specific goals. Understanding these political motivations is crucial for comprehending the dimensions of conflict, of human rights abuses, and the challenges of achieving durable solutions for displaced populations. So in Palestine, we know what we're looking at. We are looking at territorial control and ethnic cleansing. One problem that they're having with getting everyone out of Gaza right now is the regional actors see it as what we would call weaponized migration. Whether or not Israel's trying to weaponize migration or not, the performative effect is it is weaponized migration against Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, like Uganda, like wherever they'd go. Because in some cases, and I'm not saying this is what Israel necessarily wants, it's definitely not what the United States wants in Egypt with the Suez Canal, Jordan, who's a major military ally, Lebanon, which they're trying to secure and normalize with Israel. But in some cases, and this is the performative effect, again, if they were to move these populations out, displacement is deliberately engineered and manipulated by state or non-state actors as a tool of coercion or geopolitical influence. So this can involve destabilization, moving populations, generating large-scale refugee flows to strain resources. They strain resources. They fuel xenophobia and internal strife, which we're seeing with the rise of white nationalism in Europe that was really exacerbated by the Syria conflict and our dirty proxy war involvement in there, and caused political instability in neighboring states, right? Destabilization, extracting concessions as well. threatening or creating migration crises to pressure other states into making political or economic concessions. That's not really so much at play here with Jordan or Egypt. But the main problem here, because you have the Bedouin and the Sinai that the Egyptian government is still engaged with a low-grade counterinsurgency against, and the population of Jordan, which is already mostly Palestinian, demographic engineering, strategically resettling populations to alter the ethnic or political makeup of a region, potentially creating voting blocks or justifying future territorial claims. And mass migration, it's actually a threat on a state's sovereignty. So this is why it's so challenging. And we can talk about like the different issues between like Egypt, Jordan, and other countries in the region, and Europe and the United States. But we're seeing this with our own like xenophobia. It's like a threat on sovereignty. And we're going to look at a video by Matt Walsh, one of Ben Shapiro's co-hosts at the Daily Wire, talk about how like they're threatening our sovereignty. So demographic engineering. And this is why moving them again into these countries doesn't work, and why Europe is done with this, and why the United States won't take them. No one will take them. So what we're having to do from their imperial perspective is play for time, distract, release if you can't release the Epstein files, release plot Project Bluebeam and give us like alien extraterrestrial life, destabilize, play for time, and exploit the situation until everyone is dead. Because there's really no political solution to voluntary migration. There's not. So this is why we're seeing that. That's why we're not seeing any real concrete plans for voluntary migration be put into effect. All right. But here in America, it's a little bit different. It's all for profit and political consolidation. States or groups in power will displace or may displace populations to eliminate political opposition, silence dissent, or reshape demographics in their favor. This is the kind of displacement that's happening in the United States via ICE. This also can involve targeting areas with high opposition support, like Democratic states like LA, New York, Michigan, or creating a presumption of loyalty or disloyalty based on movement or staying patterns. That's less at play right now. It's more about shoring up political support. They're seeing not what they can get away with, but how fast they can get away with it. They're coming from political dissidents under the pretext of, coming after minorities. That's what they're doing. And both Palestine and the United States are seeing different types of the politics of displacement playing out under the same system. Okay. And I would also like to add that we're having to be super shady about the ICE stuff, because also we don't really have anywhere to put them. The CCOT was sending them to, El Salvador, and CCOT was a PR disaster. They're sending the wrong people. He told the dictator of El Salvador, the world's coolest dictator, Bukele, that they're going to have to build 10 more, but we're going to have to give them money to build 10 more. When Bukele came to visit the White House a little bit after Trump's inauguration, and yeah, there's nowhere for them to go. So we're sending them to random countries in small little groups in planes that don't really have, really good flight manifests and stuff. So we don't really have to put them either. So what we're having to do is build camps. And there is a new camp being built right now specifically for this purpose. And again, I just wanted to point out that this is the politics of displacement. And because of the politics of displacement in Palestine, they have nowhere to go. So what are they going to do with the West Bank? The Knesset just voted to formally annex all of Palestine. Well, okay, they can vote that, but where are the Palestinians going to go? They're not thinking rationally about this. They're just going to try to put them into refugee camps, displace all the Palestinians in the West Bank into refugee camps, put it under siege until they all die. It's not going to work, but they're going to try it. So that's what's happening there. And they're building more and more camps here, which is what we are getting into in this next coming segment. All right, cheers, y'all. I don't think we'll have enough time for a Q&A in this next segment of with an ICE activist, organizer, strategist. Ends abruptly. So it's going to be kind of jarring, but we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants today. Stand by, and you guys are awesome. All right, for our next segment here on State of Play at MintPress News, we are joined by Murad Sorry, let me it's been a long day. How do I pronounce that? I just want to make sure I don't mess it up. Awawdeh. Okay. My apologies. Murad Awawdeh. All right. For our next segment here on State of Play on MintPress News, we are joined by Murad Awawdeh, a strategist, organizer, and advocacy expert currently serving as the president and CEO at the New York Immigration Coalition, to talk about ICE raids, because it's almost like all of this stuff is connected. Our last segment before we started, we were talking about the Gaza Health Foundation. So he's the son of a Palestinian immigrant. Murad has dedicated over 2 decades of his life fighting for low-income communities of color across the state of New York. He's been featured in Vice and the Huffington Post and was honored with a U.S. Congressional Recognition and Public Service Awards from the NYIC Senate and Assembly. He serves as a trustee of the New York University Family Health Centers Board and as a member of the Justice 2020 Committee and as commissioner of the New York City Civic Engagement Commission. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So I've been asserting for a while now that there's no daylight between the war state abroad and the police state at home. ICE now has a bigger military budget than the Marine Corps. They are using Israeli and American-driven AI spyware and predictive policing tech developed by the U.S. military and Israeli defense contractors, tested on Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. And now we are seeing this more and more. And if you're just listening to the audio version of this episode, we are looking at a Democracy Now! Article headline from about an hour ago before time of recording. Trump administration to spend $1.2 billion building the largest U.S. immigration jail in Texas. The problematic thing about this that I've been warning about, it's supposed to be on Fort Bliss Army base in Texas. There's so much free space at Fort Bliss because it is a massive artillery site. So there's a lot of open ranges, and yeah, they're just going to be disappeared into that. Now, of course, you know, we've seen this before. During World War II, the U.S. government forcibly relocated and incarcerated over 120,000 people of Japanese descent in 10 concentration camps, primarily out in similarly isolated locations in the western interior of the country. And these camps were established under Executive Order 9066 issued by FDR. But before we get into the overall system, you are currently in New York, and we saw some pretty shocking footage leaked yesterday from your organization. So again, if it's just the audio, this is a ICE detention center at 26 Federal Plaza in New York. And there are no beds. There's just thermal blankets on the floor, crammed into a small room. I imagine it's hot. They've denied claims of overcrowding and inhumane conditions, but this ain't it. And people are being detained for days or weeks at a time, sleeping on the floor with no showers or change of clothes and with minimal food and outside contact. What exactly are we looking at here, Murad?
What we're looking at is the truth. And we've been saying this for several months now, that the Department of Homeland Security and ICE were using the 10th floor of 26 Federal Plaza, which is a federal administrative building, as a detention site. And I think that they know that if it were categorized appropriately, then it would be subjected to congressional oversight. We've taken congressional members like Congresswoman Nydia Velasquez, Congressmember Adriano Espaillat, Dan Goldman, and Jerry Nadler separate times to try to get access to the 10th floor, because as per the law, they have the ability to inspect these facilities that are detention centers. And ICE has consistently said it's not a detention facility, it's a processing center. And we tried getting them to define how they make, how do they justify the difference? If someone's being detained somewhere for several days or several weeks, is that a detention facility? We believe it is. And the Department of Homeland Security continues to say it's not. So that video, which we released earlier this week, illustrates the conditions that people are being held in, right? They're having very little to no food. They're getting, limited and no access to the outside world. And sort of like a black site at this point, where if you're in it, you're in it, and then you're not actually able to get contact outward. So it's been really horrible to see continue in this moment, but also at the same time, we're demanding that our congressional leaders take action, right? And the vast majority of the people who are actually at 26 Federal Plaza in that detention facility shouldn't even be detained to begin with. These are people who are going through the process to get their status and their relief, seeking justice and safety. And then what they're faced with is injustice. They're being tricked and trapped to go to 26 Federal Plaza and then detained and disappeared simply for following the process that the government has outlined for them to seek and then receive status in this country.
So this reminds me about the establishment of black sites. I think we saw this. One second, let me pull it up. Share screen. In New Jersey, I think it was a couple months ago. Newark, New Jersey mayor sues feds over arrest outside of ICE facility. So Newark Mayor Ras Baraka is suing federal officials over his May 9th arrest outside an immigration detention center, alleging malicious prosecution and false arrests. And I know that was a huge PR problem for ICE at the time. So are you under the impression that they're doing this now so they don't have to deal with that ever again?
Well, they continue to use these different sites for detention. They already have over 60,000 people detained, the most that we've ever had at a given point. In 6 months, they've detained 60,000 people. And it's just outrageous. The vast majority of people, there was data that was released earlier this week that shows that the majority of people that they're currently detaining now have no criminal convictions, right? And that just should be giving people pause. They're investing all this money, through the reconciliation process and the big ugly bill, which was the largest wealth transfer in U.S. history, of giving, the ultra wealthy tax breaks on the backs of cutting healthcare, SNAP, which is food benefits and housing subsidies, to make sure that the billionaires get, a few extra $1 million, which they don't really even need to begin with. And then tucked into that bill was the most money that ICE has ever received and the Department of Homeland Security has ever received, of over $170 billion. That's more money than all of our federal agencies get, law enforcement agencies get combined. That's more than the Russian military's budget. So it should tell you how the United States government is really prioritizing the American people, which is that they are not. And they don't care about the many, they only care about the few. And that's what they're going to continue to push. So they need these different things, to be in the limelight sometimes, so they can get away with taking away people's rights. And that's what they're doing in this moment. They're testing the limits of our democracy so that we can be pushed further into an authoritarian state. And really, the test subjects right now are immigrants. And what they're saying is, well, these people don't have rights in this country. But the U.S. Constitution never mentions U.S. citizenship as why you have the right. There's, constitutional protections are entitled to everyone in this country. There's case law that also says that. So they're trying to see what they can get away with so that they can then flip it and then use it on others who they don't have the same political beliefs, which we're already seeing them target civil society and so on and so forth.
Right. And whatever they're willing to do to Palestinians overseas or immigrants here, they are willing to do to you eventually. And, from my perspective, it's not necessarily what they're trying to get away with, because we know what they're trying to get away with, but how fast that they can do it. So obviously that's a part of it, but this entire thing is completely for profit. So I was hoping you could talk about the for-profit prisons that are being constructed. And are there any in New York? Or are you protected from that because you're a sanctuary state or city?
We do have federal land in New York, across the state, and in New York City. What we're seeing right now is New York City has 201 Varick Street, which is used as a holding place until people are able to get transferred out. And then in upstate New York in Batavia, we have the Batavia Detention Center. And those two sites are actually federally run. They're also using other sites now, like in Orange County, they're using the Orange County Jail. And then on Nassau County, the county executive signed a 287G agreement, which pretty much deputizes local law enforcement to do federal immigration enforcement. And they're using the jail out there as well. So when you look at what you mentioned earlier about, that base in Texas, using $1.2 billion to support, the creation of 5,000 beds, that's $240,000 per bed per person. So it's like, is that what we really want to be spending our money on as Americans in this moment, when people don't have food? People don't have access to healthcare. People are struggling to make ends meet. We're dealing with an affordability crisis that continuously gets worse. I think those are the sort of questions that aren't being answered in this moment because they don't want to answer them. And at the same time, we just saw horrific floods in Texas where people had no forewarning that they were happening. And where is the efforts to support the recovery of those individuals who have lost everything? Entire communities were wiped out in these floods. It just makes you wonder, like, where are the actual priorities? Instead of investing that $1.2 billion in creating a concentration camp on a U.S. military base, why not invest that in actually helping Texans who have been impacted by the floods rebuild?
Yeah, as a Texan, I definitely see it. And I don't want to sound conspiratorial because it's not like we have a historical basis for anything like this, but ICE will, I think, eventually morph into something else and then be retasked to keep the climate refugees in line in the coming years. So hot take, I guess. But now talking about seeing what we're seeing in New York, we've seen the epicenter of this effort be Los Angeles so far. Of course, we're seeing reports now that's happening in Denver, obviously Florida, in my home state of Texas. Like, I'm in Austin. It's not being published at all, but we know ICE is around here and stuff like that. But New York, we saw Tom Homan, one of my favorite Obama appointees, Obama's border czar back in the day, who's now part of the Heritage Foundation, is now running political cover for Donald Trump. He said that, we're going to go in and essentially try to break New York City. So have you seen a heightened effort in ICE operations or heightened tempo in ICE operations in New York?
Well, from day one, we've seen increase in enforcement across the state of New York. We've seen them raid farms. We've seen them raid construction sites, raiding communities. And I think what they're also doing at the courts is the most unjust part of this, right? And going after people simply for seeking safety from the lives that they had to flee, in most cases because of U.S. foreign policy, right?
Yeah.
Like, we create foreign policy that impacts people negatively on the ground in those countries, and then they flee seeking safety from persecution and other forms of violence. And then when they come here seeking that safety and refuge, we turn our backs on them. So I think for the moment that we find ourselves in, we have been already flooded. They continuously flood New York. And Tom Homan's comments the other day weren't just necessarily about, flooding New York City because we're New York City. He's saying he's targeting us intentionally because we're a sanctuary city. And, we don't have the best mayor of our history in New York City right now. He's someone who's brokered a deal with the Trump administration to avoid prosecution.
And just for the audience, that we're talking about Eric Adams, right?
Yes. The king of swagger. And he has done everything in his power to try to work with the Trump administration in this moment. He tried getting them back into Rikers Island. For those who don't know, Rikers Island, 80% of the population of people who are currently there are pre-trial detention, which means that they've not been convicted of anything. And there's a law against having ICE on Rikers Island. So he walked around that law and tried doing it through an executive order, which the New York City Council bravely took to court and got a temporary restraining order on. So I think, he's doing what he wants in this moment to try to appease the Trump administration for helping him out. And Tom Homan is trying to do everything in his power to get our policies rescinded so that they can then, militarize our local PD to help ICE conduct the raids that they're doing. So, his threats, he's been saying he's going to do this. They have been doing it already. Everyone is concerned about what would happen if what they did in California does happen in New York City. And I think that while California has an enormous amount of resources and a great infrastructure of civil society, it's just unfathomable to think that that's going to happen to us. And, we're having conversations about what that looks like, what our response is. I think as institutions, we all want to make sure that people are as safe as possible, that the directly impacted individuals know their rights, that they have access to the legal representation. And, New Yorkers are gritty, and New Yorkers don't like when people fuck with our people. I don't know if I'm allowed to curse here, but sorry.
No, it's all good. We're not CNN.
We have, a very active civil society in New York City. And people are going to stand up for their neighbors, their family members, and their communities. And we know that they're going to do that in peaceful ways. So they're going to try to say that, quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes here, we're rioting, but we're not. We're going to be protesting to defend our people and our communities.
Right. And I just wanted to go back to something you brought up, but the police being mobilized to assist with ICE officers. So I've interviewed some National Guardsmen who were mobilized in California and some who were mobilized in Florida, and they did not like the assignment at all. At least that's what they told me. Knowing the NYPD, how much would they relish doing this kind of work if they get mobilized to assist with ICE?
Well, one, they can't because it's illegal. It'll violate our local laws. But we've already been seeing them work and collude with ICE in violation of our local laws, right? So I think I've literally yesterday, this is such a random conversation today, but yesterday I had a conversation with someone who's in the National Guard for New York. And they were like, we didn't sign up for this. If they try doing this here, there's a lot of us who aren't going to want to participate. And that's just the message that I keep hearing from everyone, including NYPD officers who are like, we never signed up for this. NYPD is being used by this administration. Our local mayor is using them as like a one-stop shop to all the issues, right? Mental health crises. He's sending NYPD, public issues, everything. He's using them as the anecdote and the solution, and that's not their job, and they know that that's not their job, which is why there's such low morale amongst them. So I think if you add another layer of fuckery that they have to deal with, they're going to be pretty incensed. We're also seeing the most officers retire in this moment and getting out of the PD because of the increased demand on the shit that they have to do that's not their job.
Right. Yeah, and so we've been hearing like Sky News reported a month ago that like ICE officers morale were down a lot, but I don't know, this new expansion of the ICE budget is really going to pump up their salary numbers as well. So I'm sure that will assuage some of the morale issues as well.
Yeah, I think, there's a limit to how much unless you really are ingrained in, destroying people's lives, and that's your motive in life. I don't know how much people can or would want to take of having to do some of this stuff.
Right.
And I'm not trying to give ICE agents any cover because I'm seeing them literally disappear people who are showing up for court on a daily basis in 26 Federal Plaza and at 290 Broadway and at 201 Barrack Street in New York City. But I think in this moment, they put these astronomical quotas that they have to meet, and they don't care how they get to those numbers. They just need to meet those numbers. So if they're detaining, green card holders, TPS recipients, people with status, and people who are seeking status, it becomes sort of a numbers game to them as opposed to, the target of what they were trying to do, which is quote unquote going after the most violent individuals, which we're not seeing them do.
I was being interviewed on Breaking Points like a couple weeks ago, and this all just reminds me of, you know, before my political transformation, when I was in a special operations unit in Afghanistan. They were like, it was under Obama, and it was unspoken, like, we need quotas. It was like, we don't have the intelligence to be going out every night against like high value targets. Well, they're just like, well, hit likely or suspected targets, and you know, there was just nothing there. And we call them dry holes, and we freak a bunch of people out. And this kind of seems like it's our kind of imperialism now turning in on itself. And we've entered this new age of impunity because governments learn from each other. We've kind of seen the ditching of international law over the past 2 years. There's been a lot of transmission between different Western militaries and ICE and the NYPD and the Israeli Defense Forces and Shin Bet and stuff. And this kind of like impunity in terms of just disappearing people, holding them in administrative detention is very like reminiscent of like IDF stuff. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that this is one thing that, you know, the world can go hungry, but the one area and one industry that will never go hungry is the military industrial complex.
Yeah.
They will never go hungry. If you look at all the resources we're investing in them here and whatever foreign aid we give to other nations for military aid, it's going through the military industrial complex, right? Like, it's to buy weapons from US military companies that are selling these bombs, the bullets, the guns to destroy other people's lives and decimate people, commit genocides, and get away with it, right? And that's what we're seeing happen in real time in Gaza. And that same sort of mentality is being used across the board. And while it may not be bullets and bombs here in New York, what we're seeing is the same tactics of disappearing people, you know, putting people in detention indefinitely because they're saying that people don't have rights because they're in jail. And it's not even a real jail because it's a detention site, and detention sites are not jails. They're supposed to be, you know, immigration isn't a criminal violation. It's a civil violation.
Like parking tickets.
Yeah. And we should thank, you know, Bill Clinton, who in 1994 passed horrible laws, and then furthered by Barack Obama, who actually deported the most people. So one thing that always happens is we see, you know, Democratic leaders, you know, actually implement the horrible rhetoric we're seeing from the other side. And then now we set up the moment where all these policies, all the infrastructure that was built under previous presidencies, Donald Trump is weaponizing against the immigrant communities today. And we're not just talking about people who don't have status. We're talking about people who have status. And now they're saying that they're going to start going after US citizens who've been naturalized to denaturalize them. So the moments we're living in right now, I think, are really critical. If we want to say we are a democracy, we need to fight to stay a democracy, because every single pillar of that democracy is being attacked by this administration. And we need people to fight back, or we're going to just end up in an authoritarian state, which many communities will tell you, we already feel like we were in an authoritarian state in our city, our state, across this country. But everyone's going to start feeling that relatively soon.
Right. And then one comment I want to make about you bringing up the military industrial complex. We no longer have the power projection as a kind of like a dying empire to wage forever wars overseas. So if you can't do it over there, well, this is a perfect opportunity to have another forever war right here in our own soil. So we've entered again in this new age of impunity, where, you know, you can make the bold assertion that a lot of ICE actions are patently non-constitutional, and there's not a lot of checks going on. They're not really being challenged by the Democrats, which are the opposition party. We know throughout like ICE's history that there was founded or at least expanded under every Democratic administration. It's baked into the national security state, and surveillance state, which Obama really expanded beyond the Patriot Act. What are you and what are activists and organizations like yours trying to do to categorize ICE actions or try to hold them accountable, or is that even possible right now?
Yeah, every level of government has a role to play in accountability. We need our local level of government. You know, just recently, our city council passed the budget, which increased immigration legal services by $50 million, which is great, but we need to go further. So it's great to also see our mayor just recently, and I think today, issued a letter asking, Department of Homeland Security to understand what's happening in their building, which has been being reported for months at this point, and wants to inspect it because it shouldn't be actually used as a detention center. That's not what it's used for, right? So it becomes a buildings inspection issue and a fire issue. But we also need the mayor to put his money where his mouth is, right? Like, you need to also invest in the supports that we know are going to be helpful and ensure that he doesn't walk around our sanctuary policies at the local level. At the state level, we need the state to step up and pass the New York for All Act, which would prohibit state agencies from colluding, which we're seeing local PDs outside of New York City colluding with immigration enforcement to trap people in traffic stops where they just pull someone over just because they look Latino or look like they could be someone from somewhere else. And then somehow ICE or Border Patrol show up 2 seconds later and detain the individual. So the New York for All Act would stop those types of practices from happening. And at the federal level, we need our entire federal government to stand up. Regardless of your political affiliation, this is a moment that people need to really question our constitutional rights. And they shouldn't be thinking that some people deserve it and some people don't, because if that's the case, then no one has constitutional rights. And we need them to uphold the law. And I know that sounds weird in a moment that we're seeing them being flagrantly against and undermining the law. But if we don't have the foundation of our democracy, which is our US Constitution, being upheld, then what do we have? So our federal reps need to step up, hold this administration accountable, ask the Department of Homeland Security what specifically is happening, and then start taking back some of the resources or take away all the resources that they just gave them, because what they're using that money for is going to be to continue to harm families and separate families, gut our communities. And overall, if we're a capitalist country, this should be a huge red flag for everyone, because the economic driver of this nation is actually immigrants, right? Just to give you one example of that, if you just look at agriculture, right? 70% of the workforce there are immigrants. It's a $1 trillion industry. And who are they targeting? Farm workers. So if you're doing that, who's going to be supporting that industry moving forward? Healthcare, 30%, 40% of those workers are immigrants. And they have been attacking health workers as well and detaining them. So if you look at the grand scheme of the way in which every single person who's watching this, his life is impacted, I can assure you, you will have a much harder life because of this mass deportation agenda that the Trump administration is waging right now, because every single aspect of your existence is supported by the communities that are being targeted right now.
Yeah. Well, that's what as the material conditions continue to degrade, that's what the expansion of the police state is for, to keep people in line. Maybe. Yeah. And there is some ideological fragmentation happening around in MAGA circles about this. And if you have another 5 minutes, I'm just going to bring this up real quick. What is going on with my files today? Sorry, everybody. Okay. So from earlier,
some of the most shameful.
So MAGA influencer says Representative Maria Elvira Salazar is not American and should go back to Cuba. The MAGA influencer is Matt Walsh, who is a self-described Christian fascist. Direct quote. And this is the ideological line that's driving this.
Painful moments in our past as a country relates to how we have treated immigrants who are not criminals.
What do you mean by our? What do you mean by we, Maria? Okay, you're Cuban. Your greatest priority is to destroy our national sovereignty and identity. You talk about American history like it's something to be ashamed of. So there's no we here. You're not American. You clearly don't like this country or identify yourself with it. You want to talk about we, go back to Cuba and talk about we. I mean, this is how dare you come here and start telling us that we aren't allowed to have a country anymore? Okay, how dare you come here and tell us that, it's shameful. It's shame. You should be ashamed. How dare you? Get the hell out. Seriously.
So that's the main thrust. There's not much more intellectual or emotional curiosity beyond that. I'm just wondering how sustainable this will be over the next years?
Well, they're trying to make it as crazy as possible to break down the systems as quickly as possible so that there is no way of an aggrieved individual getting justice, right? And, you know, that comment and his comments that he just shared right now are actually like ludicrous. I think that this always goes back to the sense of, you know, ownership. Who owns something or someone? And this nation was built on the takings from our indigenous siblings who were massacred in this country so that we can build this country, right? And then for over 200 years, people were enslaved in this country to build it. And then after that, that's when immigrants started also coming in to help continuously build this nation. So I think once you hear things like that, it makes you really wonder, how are they defining the words that they're using? Because how I hear it is him saying that he doesn't think anyone who isn't like him should be here. And this is a country of immigrants. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And unfortunately, every wave of immigrants who have come here over the past 200 years have faced different adversary.
We got it.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who faced different challenges that the previous generation faced as well. But every other generation has faced the otheringness, right? So it's just horrific when you hear people say that. It just like he's dabbling in like white supremacist ideology and targeting a congressional member and telling her to go back to the country she comes from.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the big guys at Daily Mail. The other big guy is Ben Shapiro. So this is not surprising. He is a self-described white supremacist as well and a Christian fascist. But, you know, that's kind of like driving this ideology. But he's like, okay, get out, get all the immigrants out. Then what? You know, this is kind of why it seems bleak right now, but it's just not a sustainable model. And I do want to give some people hope about that. Like, first of all, I have a military background. It's just logistically not possible. It's just not.
Even with the, you know, yes, it's logistically not possible, practically not possible, but they're going to try, right?
Right.
And they're going to destroy as much as they can to get to a point where they can say, look, we delivered on our promise. And I think that their promise is, you know, completely opposite of the American promise of a nation where all people who live here have rights, are living in a democracy where people can participate in their government and actually be able to build a nation for the future generations. It's just really a moment where people need to take a step back and ask themselves, do I really believe in this democracy that we're living in? And do I want to make it better? Or am I okay with it collapsing and us going into a fascist authoritarian regime?
Yeah. It might happen at least for a time, but, you know, those never last. They, you know, collapse under their own inherent contradictions, but it may really suck in the short run. But before you go, I was hoping, what would you like people watching this to do?
I think the best thing that people can do right now is figure out how to organize locally, make sure that they're starting to understand what their rights are, because I think there's a wide swath of people who don't understand what their rights are. And for folks who want to learn what their rights are, they can visit our website. They can go to nyic.org/KYR and just read the material there. You have rights that are enshrined in our US Constitution, and you have civil liberties. And we want to make sure that people understand what their rights are so that if they ever are being violated, that they can step up and actually fight back in the right way. And then show up for each other. You know, this is a moment where community actually matters and showing up is important. People should take action with us, join us. They can text NYIC to the number 52886. And we'll be sending out action alerts on that platform, but also demand accountability from every level of government. What your local government's doing to keep families together, what your state is doing, what your federal reps are doing. It's all critically important in this moment. And every act of dissent, because dissent is the most patriotic thing you can do, matters right now.
Right. Well, thanks so much. I know you're very busy and you got to go. Where do you have a personal account that people can follow you where you put out personal things, or is it just NYIC.org?
Folks can follow us on, all the socials. I think it's at the NYIC, THENYIC. And then my handle is just, hey, it's Murad, across platforms as well.
Okay, well, we will put those links in the description. Thanks so much for taking the time to come out here today and tell us about what the situation is in New York and
thank you.
within the country in general. Yeah, thanks very much.
Be well.